What's good, y'all? It's your boy Mixtape Moth. So there have been a lot of discussions and debates on Twitter and on YouTube as of late, focusing on the origins of hip hop as it pertains to race. Now, the issue that is being debated is which group created hip hop first? Was it Jamaicans, foundational Black Americans, or Puerto Ricans? And I want to be clear that when I talk about the creation, I'm referring to the earliest days of hip hop, 1973 and even the years prior. I'm not talking about the contributions from folks that went on in the mid to late 70s, early 80s, and even into the 90s when hip hop was already well established. I just want to make that clear. But I want to set this off by saying that I think we can all collectively agree that hip hop is a Black art form that was created by Black people unequivocally, right? Specifically, I want to stress that it was created by Black Americans. Now, as a white person, I fully understand that I am a guest in hip hop culture, but I am passionate about hip hop, and I have been contemplating this hip hop creation topic over the course of the last few days, so I wanted to address it in this video. But getting back to the reality of hip hop culture being created by Black Americans, the roots of hip hop, way before that mystical warm summer August night in the South Bronx in '73, way before that night, the origins can be traced back to Black American music culture since the early 1900s. There are traces of hip hop that can be found in jazz, blues, gospel, soul, and funk that all predate 1973. Whether it's toasting from Black American disc jockeys, early styles of rhyming, or breakdancing. It was all a part of Black culture, that had been going on since the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. I'm sure some folks have seen clips on social media of the Jubilaires, Pigmeat Markham, The Last Poets, Dolomite, James Brown, even Muhammad Ali. It's well documented. That swag, that rhythm, that cadence, it definitely comes from Black American culture. Now, with respect to Jamaican involvement, and shout out to the Jamaicans right quick, there are Jamaican people who feel strongly in their beliefs that Jamaicans created hip hop, and there are quite a few articles that suggest that they did. And we know that the legendary DJ Kool Herc, who is Jamaican, is dubbed as the godfather of hip hop. Now, no one, myself included, should ever discredit or take away from what Kool Herc was doing in those park jams in the South Bronx back in the early to mid 70s. He was a true pioneer who most definitely shaped the culture. And I think to minimize his achievements would be anti-hip hop. And it is documented that Kool Herc had his sound systems that he brought with him from Jamaica. So I suppose it is reasonable for one to conclude that he incorporated some of the techniques that he learned while in Jamaica and applied them to what was going on in the Bronx. That being said, the evidence does tend to show that Kool Herc wasn't playing dancehall or Caribbean style tracks at these park jams. Now later on he would occasionally, but in the early phases, specifically, he was definitely playing extended breaks for funk and soul records from Black American musicians, the breaks that had that early hip hop feel. And I gotta point out that actually before Kool Herc had stepped on the scene, there was DJ Grandmaster Flowers, who in the late 60s was credited for rocking 3 turntables at the same time. So Herc was indeed one of the biggest pioneers, but there were some other folks before him that put in work too. So while there were Jamaicans and other folks from the Caribbean at the forefront contributing from day one, that doesn't necessarily mean that Jamaicans created hip hop, especially when considering that Herc felt he had to downplay his Jamaican roots early on in order to gain acceptance from the crowds in the Bronx. But let's not get it twisted. The Caribbean influence in hip hop has always been present, no doubt about it. And I have to highlight that there are so many hip hop greats of Jamaican descent, whether we are talking rappers or producers, and these folks should never be diminished or looked upon as individuals who are outsiders or as folks who didn't contribute. Like some of your favorite rappers are part Jamaican. And there are a lot. So we aren't going to minimize, Jamaicans' role in this culture. That should not happen. So the other point of contention that came this past week was when Fat Joe stated that black people and Puerto Rican created hip hop together. It was a side-by-side 50-50 thing. And while I have a lot of respect for Fat Joe, and I think he receives a lot of unnecessary hate on social media, especially from the younger generation and from folks who aren't from New York. I think his numbers and percentages here are a little off. I have been to the South Bronx before, my first time back in the mid to late 90s. And at that time, it looked like it was possibly 50-50 with black and Puerto Rican people side by side, like a hip hop utopia. So in fairness to Fat Joe, when he was a kid coming up in the forest projects in the South Bronx in the late 70s and early 80s, it is possible that it may have looked 50-50 to him. However, when we are talking about the original days in the early 70s and prior, the inception, because that is the focus here. It is unlikely that the numbers of Puerto Ricans actively involved in hip hop with black people at that same time would be that high. And I want to repeat, I'm talking about the early days, not the mid to late 70s or even the early 80s. Because in the mid to late 70s and early 80s, after hip hop was created, there were some notable Puerto Rican figures who contributed a lot to the culture. Guys like Joe Conzo, DJ Disco Wiz, Prince Whipper Whip, Charlie Chase, and Crazy Legs. And Puerto Ricans also contributed a lot to both graffiti and breaking. So I want to be very clear that Puerto Ricans were definitely in the building or were outside practicing these elements when hip hop was created. But if anything, they were contributing to the sound and elements that were already established by black folks. But they were adding on, no doubt. And yeah, I'm very familiar with movies like Wild Style, Style Wars, and Beat Street, all of which were from the early 80s, and all three featured black and Latino people doing this hip hop thing in unison. So to wrap this up, the question we could ask is, what now? What was the point in dissecting all of this? And it definitely was not done to alienate or divide groups. I would say that the main purpose is to give credit to black Americans for birthing hip hop, but also to acknowledge the essential role that Jamaicans, Puerto Ricans, and other people of Caribbean descent played in hip hop since its inception. I do think that it's good that people are being forced to, do some research and even study aspects of the early days in hip hop, way before albums like The Chronic, Doggy Style, and Illmatic, because oftentimes on, let's say, hip hop Twitter, that's where the conversations typically start. The 90s, like people forget there's anything before 94. So while I feel that these hip hop origins debates can be healthy, I suppose the only potential negative consequence could be that some folks may get caught up in emotion and focus on, dividing and conquering in an attempt to spin their respective narratives. And I get it. It is human nature to want to represent your culture and to have pride in its achievements. But it's also imperative that we accept the facts for what they really are. And that is that hip hop is an art form that was created by black people, period. I already know that white people for sure did not create it. And they were not really involved that early on, and I'm totally okay with that. Although there was that one white kid in Style Wars, but Then again, that movie was 1983, so a lot later on. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section. It's your boy Mixtape Moth. I'm signing out, but be sure to hit that like button and please subscribe. As always, it's peace and blessings. The origins of hip hop. One.